Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shannon and this is Shannon's Book Nook. And today I'm going to be going through my top 15 favorite books of all time with some honorable mentions. Let's get into it. All right, so before we get into my top 15 favorites of all time, I am going to talk about some honorable mentions, and I'm just going to really quickly go through them, and then we will get into my top 15. Now, when we get into my top 15, it is in no particular order. Also, like my number one and my number 15, everything in between, like they're all very loved. So for different reasons. So honestly, like it's just a list, and number one is no better or no worse than, my number 15. And if you don't like these books, that's perfectly okay. But I will hear no negativity about my favorite books. All right, so my honorable mentions, I'm just going to name them real quick and then we'll get into my top 15. Okay, so my honorable mention number one is the Saga series, which is a comic graphic novel series by Brian K. Vaughan. I will say that even though this is a graphic novel slash comic series, this is not a book for kids. There is a lot of nudity. There is some stuff that is very much adult. Okay. My next honorable mention is the Windy City series by Liz Tomford, specifically the book Caught Up, because that is the book that absolutely obsessed with. Then I have the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa, Hurt for Me by Heather Levy, We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kluwer, Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman, and All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata, and last but not least, Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. So my first book that we're going to talk about is number 15, which is the Sheets series by Brianna Thumler. Now, this is a graphic novel. This is for middle grades, and this series has my heart. I cried, especially in the second and third book. Like when we got to the final book, I was in tears. So this series follows Marjorie Glatt, and her family runs a laundry mat, and the laundromat, it has ghosts, and one of the ghosts is a young boy named Wendell. And Marjorie and Wendell become fast friends, and the book series just kind of follows them through everything. And Marjorie is dealing with the recent loss of her mother, so there's a lot of trigger warnings for grief and death, specifically of a child and of a parent. So this series just, I highly recommend it. Even though it's for middle grades and it is graphic novels, I still recommend it for adults because it is so well written, so good. All right, book number 14 might shock some people. Honestly, kind of shocked me a little bit. It's going to be Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. So, this is actually a literary nonfiction, and it is about the Osage murders and the birth of the FBI. So, um, I particularly loved the way this book was written. It didn't feel like a nonfiction, even though it is. It reads more like a story. And so it was just really easy for me to get through this nonfiction. And the fact that this is real was very frustrating, very heartbreaking, to know that things like this are still happening to a lot of minority groups in the United States. is very frustrating. So I highly recommend, I mean, I know there's a movie about it. I have not seen the movie, but I highly recommend checking out Killers of the Flower Moon. Book number 13 is going to be Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This was the first book that I read that was an Abby Jimenez book, and I am officially obsessed. I have read all of her backlisted books and I love them all, but this one has a special place in my heart. So in this book, we follow um, Alexis, who her family is very well to do with, they are all surgeons, her mom, her dad, her brother. And she is also a surgeon, but her brother decides that he is going to be going to Africa with his girlfriend slash maybe fiance, and he no longer wants to be a surgeon. So now it's her job to uphold the family name Montgomery in the hospitals, and she just doesn't want that on her shoulders. So her parents are a lot, a lot. And then the main male character in the book, Daniel, is like a complete opposite to her. This is almost like an opposites attract. It is also a little bit of an age gap. There's like 10 years between the two. But this book was funny. It had me laughing in the beginning, and then we get more serious. There's a baby goat. I mean, it has a little bit of everything, and there were places in this book where I sobbed because of the things that both of these characters are having to deal with. And it was way more than just your standard romance. And I loved that about this book. Book number 12 is another series, but I'm going to specifically talk about the first book in this series, which is Seventh Circle by Tate James. This is book 1 in the Hades series. Now, this is part of the Shadow Grove series. And I highly recommend checking out the Madison Kate series first, because there are some things that are happening in this book that kind of, you see some things in that series. So you really need to read Madison Kate first, which I did love that series, because I read that first, loved it, and I decided to go in this. But the main female character in this book, Hayden, I love her. I love her so much. She's a badass. And this this series has such a special place in my heart, but it is not for everyone. I will tell you that. This is a why choose. It's got some darker things going on. So we have I don't even know if I can give you really a synopsis about this book without um, spoiling some things that happen in the Madison Kate series. So, but yeah, Hayden is in this book, and she's got her harem of men, and they all are great. But Cass specifically, who we see in the Madison Kate series, that man has me in a freaking chokehold. Love him so much. I highly recommend both of these series by Tate James. All right, book number 11 is another series. If you haven't noticed, I do read a lot of series. So this is a fantasy romance series, and it is The Kindred Curse. The first book is Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. This book, I'm holding up book 2, Glow of the Everflame, because this is the book that, whew. So Diem and Luther and the gang. Okay, look. So Diem in Spark of the Everflame, her mother has gone missing, and she wants more information about where her mother is. And so she decides to pretend to be a healer, because her mom was the castle healer. And so Diem is like, look, I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm going to pretend to be her like apprentice, and I'm going to go into the castle. I'm going to try and gather information to find out where my mom went. And yeah, so it goes from there. And I don't want to give too many spoilers because I feel like it's a pretty fast paced book. Books 1 and 2 are pretty fast paced. Book 3 has some pacing issues, but I still loved the book. Book 4 has not been released yet. And so this book, I did start reading it before it got picked up by a publisher, which it did get picked up by Atria. So I'm holding the re-release. So I have books 1 through 3 as indie, and I'm also hopefully going to have them as Atria books. But I'm hoping book 4 will be coming out later this year, maybe, hopefully. I really hope to get the finale done because I need answers. I need answers. All right, book number 10 is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Now, this book was originally published in 1979, and wow. Okay, let me just tell you, this book was, it's heavy, okay? But it is a must read, okay? It is a must read. So in this book, we follow Dana, who is a modern woman. She's 26 years old, and she basically time travels back to the 18th century, I believe. She is just snatched in time and sent to this antebellum South where slavery is still very much around. And Rufus is the son of a white man who is a plantation owner. And Rufus is drowning, and Dana saves this guy. So Dana is drawn back repeatedly through time to save Rufus, and she doesn't understand why. And her time in the antebellum South, because she is a Black woman, she is obviously thought to be a slave. And there are times where bad things happen. And it is very hard to read, but it is a part of our history that we have to learn about so it never happens again. So I highly recommend this book, but definitely be careful with your mental health going into this book. Definitely recommend. All right, number 9 is a thriller, and it's the first book that I read by this author, and it's Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Okay, this book, okay, you cannot tell me that the stuff that is happening in this book doesn't really happen in real life, okay? When I found out the twist in this book and what was really going on, okay, it was creepy already, and then it was a whole new level of WTF, okay? I really believe that stuff like this is actually happening in the real world, which is terrifying, okay? So we are following, so I'll just read what it says. No visitors, no nights spent away from the apartment, no disturbing the other residents, all of whom are rich or famous or both. So these are the only rules for Jules Larson's new job as an apartment sitter at the Bartholomew, one of Manhattan's most glamorous and secretive buildings. Okay, that's all I'm going to read for you. Okay, that's because that's really all you need to know. This girl is apartment sitting for a new job, and some crazy stuff goes down. So yeah, this was my first Riley Sager book. Now, I will say, like, I have read a lot of his newer stuff, and I'm not obsessed with it as much as I was this one. There are a couple of misses for me for Riley Sager, but I will say this one, yeah, read it. All right, book number 8 is The House in the Cerulean Sea. Okay, and this is by T.J. Klune. And in this book, we follow Linus Baker, who is a caseworker, and he is a rule follower for as a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. And so upper management decides to give him this assignment where he has to travel to an orphanage on a distant island, and he has to determine whether six dangerous magical children are so dangerous, in fact, that they'll likely bring about the end of the days. Okay. So when Linus shows up at this island, he is greeted by Arthur Parnassus, who is the man in charge of these children and this island. Yeah, I absolutely loved this book. There's a little bit of romance. The kids in this book. Oh, Lucy, Theodore. Oh my gosh, yes, I love these characters. So I highly recommend this book. Now, I did find out some things about this book after the fact, after reading it, that I was like, oh, I don't like that. But at the same time, like, that doesn't take away from my enjoyment of this book because it was just so whimsical, so sweet. The kids in this book, they are stereotyped, and because they have magic and they're called dangerous, and people think that these kids are going to end the world, and they're just kids. And so Linus learns the truth, and I absolutely adore this book. Book number 7. Oh my gosh. Okay. This book, Take My Hand by Dolene Perkins Valdez. Oh, okay. So this book is a historical fiction, but it's based on true events. And because of things that are going on currently with the US politics and policies, and when I read this, it was just a couple months after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Okay. So when I read this book, when I read this book, the anger, the emotion was right there at the surface. So this is like a right time, right place type thing for this book. But even though it was like at that time, this was just a perfect time to read it, I think I would feel this way if I read it for the first time right now. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so this book is set in Montgomery, Alabama in 1973. Yes, 1973. So Sybil Townsend is fresh out of nursing school, and she is determined to make a difference, especially in her African American community in Montgomery, Alabama. And so she works at the Montgomery Family Planning Clinic. And her first job that she gets ends up taking her out to this dusty county road to this worn down one room cabin. And she finds out that her clients that she's supposed to be helping are India and, oh gosh, what's the other sister's name? Erica. And they are children. They are 11 and 13. But because they are Black and because they are poor, the family clinic has determined that these girls need to be put on birth control. And Sybil tries to grapple with this choice that is being made for these girls. And they're only children. Like, they haven't even kissed a boy. So she's very confused by why this is happening. And so she takes them kind of like under her wing, into her heart, and she tries to do what's best for them. But some things happen throughout this book that, when I tell you I was angry, I don't think I had ever been so mad while reading a book in my life. Okay. You need to read this book. Okay, this next book is another historical fiction. This is book number 6, and it's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And my copy is a little torn up. But you know what? I'm not even mad, because when I tell you this book has traveled the world with me, it traveled the world with me. So the first time I read this book, I read it, I want to say, I think it was 2018 when I first read it. And this book went to Israel with me. And I was reading it on the plane. I was reading it when we were on the bus. I mean, I can't read while driving, but like when the buses were stopped and we were waiting, like I'm telling you, I read this while I was in Israel. Okay. And when you know about what's happening in this book, now this is set in Paris, France, but it's during World War II, and Adolf Hitler's at his biggest, and there's war everywhere. Okay. So this book follows two sisters during World War II, and they are separated by, so the book spans many years. Okay. And I just, one sister is a mother. The other sister, the younger sister, she is a rebel at heart, and she just wants something to fight for, something to believe in. And she decides to become the Nightingale, and she decides to help in the rebellion, and to, stand up to what is happening in the world right now. And that just, there is, a little bit of a love story going on. There is heartbreak there. I have never had, this was before I was on any kind of social media when I read this. Okay. So I wasn't on Instagram yet. I wasn't definitely not on BookTube, because I didn't get on BookTube until like last year. So I've never had such a big hangover. I've never cried so hard at a book. I've never recommended this book as much as I recommend. I've never recommended a book as much as I have recommended this book. So, absolutely loved this book. All right, we're getting into the top 5. Okay, let's go. Number 5 is A Brush with Love by Maisie Eddings. Okay. I read this originally before it even came out, because it was a NetGalley arc when I read it. And when I tell you, I have never felt so seen in my life, I'm telling you, okay? I have never related to a character so much in my life. So Harper, um, she is dealing with the stress to stay afloat, of being the perfect child, not wanting to be a burden to her friends or her romantic partner, when it comes to her mental health and anxiety, and finding, a balance in life. Okay. Harper is me. Harper is me. And this book, and then on top of that, oh my gosh, the main character, Dan, he was so loving and supportive and loyal and caring and patient. I loved both of them so much. So much. All right, number 4. Actually, from here on out, the rest of the books are going to be parts of series, and they are all fantasy romance series. And I'm going to be quite honest. The next two, number 3 and 4, could really be lower on this list. But like I said earlier, like all of these books are beloved books. They could all be interchangeable. I mean, realistically, like all of these books just have a very, very special place in my heart. So, number 4 is from the Deliciously Dark Fairy Tale series by K.F. Breene. And the first book is called A Ruin of Roses. And so in this book, we follow Finley and Nefane, who are both shifters. Okay, Nefane is a dragon shifter. And in the beginning, we don't know what kind of shifter Finley is. We do find out throughout the series, but I'm not going to spoil that for you. So I will say the humor in this book is not for everybody, but I loved it. K.F. Breen's humor is awesome, great for me. It works for me. And the spice in these books, this is, I will say, this is what I would say, this is a darker um fantasy romance series, so there are some things in here that are questionable. And the original series is 4 books, and there's now a spin-off that is like a duology. So, and that follows different characters. So books 1 through 4 follow Nefane and Finley, and then the spin-off is just 2 books following a different character. And I'm really hoping to get a spin-off of Finley's brother. I would love to see more about him. So, highly recommend this series if you like shifters, if you like fantasy romance, if you like darker themes, and you don't mind spice. Highly recommend. All right, number 3 is The Kingdom of the Wicked series by Carrie Maniscalco. I'm specifically holding up book number 2 because there's something I want to address with this series real quick. So, Kingdom of the Wicked, book number 1, is definitely a YA book, young adult. But this series very quickly moves into new adult territory. So book number 2 has some spicy scenes, and then book number 3, we are fully in the new adult category. Okay. So I do want to preface that because I've been seeing this series in the young adult, and I'm like, this book number 2 and number 3 are not young adult. Okay. And I fear that you are leading people astray when you don't put it where it needs to be. You have younger people who don't need to be reading about this kind of stuff yet. Okay. So, Kingdom of the Wicked, we follow 2 sisters who are witches, and they summon what they think is a demon, but is actually a prince of hell. And Wrath is not happy about being basically tethered to one of the sisters. And so, yeah, there is romance in this. It very, very little romance in the first book. There's like some banter and stuff, but in the second and third book, we get some scenes. Okay. Now, I will say the Kingdom of the Wicked series, there are 2 other books, like Throne of the Fallen and then Throne of Secrets, which is like spin-offs, because this book, the trilogy, focuses on Wrath, but then the other books in the series follow like his brothers. So like pride, envy, greed. Okay. So, highly recommend this. Okay. So, look, I'm going to be a basic B right now. um because I feel like my rejuvenated love for fantasy romance and fantasy, well, specifically fantasy romance, because I feel like I read that more than I do the actual just standard fantasy, comes from a newfound love for Sarah J. Maas. So I did not know who that was until like 2018 when somebody recommended that book to that Court of Thorns and Roses series to me. But there is a series that she has written that I love even more. And that's going to be the Throne of Glass series. And specifically, look, if you've read this series, the first 2 books were just okay. I loved them, but they're just okay to a lot of people. This series really starts to pick up in book 3 and 4. And then book 5 will have your head spinning. Okay? So I'm holding up book 5, Empire of Storms, because this is the book that made me gasp and be like, what the heck is going on? So I'll give you a little synopsis of the first book, okay? So in Throne of Glass, we have Selena Sardothian, who is a prisoner in the, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the prison. In Dover prison. Okay. Now I will say this prison is it has a reputation for being one of the worst. Okay. So Selena ends up getting kind of, I would say, rescued. She's not really being rescued. She's taken out of the prison to participate in these games that are going on in the palace. So Prince Dorian, takes her out of the prison, and basically she becomes his like champion. And she is basically forced, if she doesn't want to go back to the prison, to participate in these games. And you either, if I remember correctly, you either win or you die. So, yeah. This series is YA, I will say that. They do get a tiny, but they're like fade to black mostly. And I loved this series so much. I will say that I think I end up loving it more than Akhtar, but Akhtar also has a special place in my heart. And this is a pretty big series. There are 7 books. 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. And then there's a set of like prequels. And I am still like in shock that Sarah J. Maas wrote these books when she was 16. Like she started writing this series when she was 16. So that just blows my mind when I think about what I was doing when I was 16. Yeah, no, I was not writing books, and they were definitely not becoming bestsellers. So highly recommend Throne of Glass. Like I said, it is YA. There is a lot of fantasy heavy things since it is YA, but I feel like it's pretty easy to follow for the most part. So if you have not read Throne of Glass, you should read it. So I said in my last clip that I was going to be a little bit of a basic B with my second pick. But I feel like I'm even more being even more basic with my number 1 pick being from the same author. And it's going to be the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, but I'm holding up book 2, A Court of Mist and Fury. Okay? Look, you either love them or you hate them, right? So I was recommended this series by the same person who recommended Throne of Glass, but they were like, read A Court of Thorns and Roses first because it's fantasy romance and you'll be able to get into it. And then once you've read that, check out Throne of Glass. So I was like, okay, bet. So I read Akatar, became absolutely obsessed. Okay, this is where my obsession of fantasy romance came from as an adult. Like I've always liked fantasy and fantasy romance and reading in general. But no, when I'm telling you, when I read this book, I became obsessed. That's when I started reading. I went from like 30 books a year to like 90 and 100 and then eventually 200 books a year because of this series. Okay? I was looking for something to give me the same feeling that this series does. Okay? Have I found it? No. That's why this is at number 1. Okay? So if you don't know, this book follows Feyre, who is a human. And in A Court of Thorns and Roses, she ends up killing a fae, but she doesn't know that it's a fae. And she's basically forced to go into the fae kingdom and stay with the high Lord of the Spring Court. So yeah. And then the series just takes off from there. And now we are in book 5. Hopefully book 6 will come out in the next year or so. I would love that. But yeah. If you haven't read ACOTAR, what are you doing? If you have loved it and you didn't like it, don't tell me. Don't tell me. Okay? So those were all of my books that I absolutely love and I'm obsessed with. And those were my 15 favorites of all time. And like I said, if you loved them, yay. If you hated them, please don't tell me. I will accept no criticism for these books. Okay? Love you. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you stuck around for this long, don't forget to like the video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. And I will see you next time. Bye.